Science with Folly.
Tinakwe. Welcome to Science with Folly. Today we're looking at properties of molecular substances. And there's three properties that you need to know about: solubility, melting and boiling points, and conductivity. First, let's look at solubility. That's to do with how substances dissolve in other substances. Now, the key point here is that polar molecules will dissolve in polar solvents, or non-polar molecules will dissolve in non-polar solvents. And we have this term, like dissolves in like. For example, ethanol is polar, so it dissolves in water, which is also polar. But cyclohexane does not dissolve in water because cyclohexane is non-polar. If you look at some molecular diagrams of ethanol and water, you can see that they both have polar bonds and they're both asymmetrical, which means clearly they are both polar. The whole molecule is polar. But if we look at cyclohexane, for example, you can see that this molecule is non-polar because it is symmetrical. And that's why ethanol dissolves in water, but cyclohexane will not dissolve in water. You've probably seen this. If you put like some petrol, which is similar to cyclohexane, on top of water, it appears to float on top. That's because it doesn't dissolve. It sits on top forming a layer, like you do when you put oil on top. But ethanol, as you know, which is basically alcohol, it's in beer and wine and stuff like that. Clearly it is dissolved in water because when you pick up your bottle of wine, there isn't like a layer of alcohol on top. Hey. Melting and boiling points. What we have to know is that molecules in molecular substances are attracted to each other and held together by what we call weak intermolecular forces. If we look at a little diagram here, here's two molecules. They're both held together on the inside by strong covalent bonds, and that's an intramolecular force because it's within the molecule. But between the molecule, there are these weak intermolecular forces. And therefore, because intermolecular forces are weak, not much heat energy is needed to overcome them. Therefore, molecular substances have low melting and boiling points. For example, water and salt. Water melts at 0 degrees, it boils at 100 degrees, whereas salt takes a lot more energy to melt it and to boil it even more. Why? Because remember, the particles within salt are ions, and ions are held together by ionic bonds which are very strong and need a lot of heat energy to break, whereas the particles in water are water molecules, and those water particles are held together by weak intermolecular forces. Lastly, conductivity. Molecular substances do not conduct electricity. They are insulators. And the reason for this is that molecules are neutral. They don't have a charge. Even though some are polar, the overall molecule is neutral. The electrons are held tightly within the molecule. Therefore, within a molecular substance, there are no free charged particles to carry an electrical current. So just to recap the main properties of molecular substances, solubility relates to polarity, and remember, like dissolves like. Melting and boiling points of molecular substances are low because of the weak intermolecular forces, and molecular substances do not conduct electricity. They are insulators because the electrons are held tightly and there is no free charged particles. Hope you learned something. Ka kite anō. See you again.
Science with Folly.
Help! I'm dissolving in this water. What you talking about, fool? Bears are insoluble. What do you know? You're not polar.